In this part keeping it engaging, simple, and with a clear setup for future parts. Let me know if you'd like me to adjust anything. You said Kiri had seen many worlds. She had fought in countless battles, met beings of all shapes and sizes, and traveled to the furthest reaches of the galaxy. But nothing had ever prepared her for the humans of Earth. They were weak, fragile, and yet there was something about them that was both curious and captivating. Kiri's mission was simple: observe. The Intergalactic Council had sent her to Earth to monitor the humans' strange behavior. They had requested she gather information on how they lived, how they interacted with each other, and how they had managed to survive so long despite their physical frailty. Humans weren't known for their strength, but their resilience had earned them a place among the stars. Kiri had been assigned to a quiet apartment in the city. It was a small space, filled with all the comforts of human life: books, gadgets, and strange devices she couldn't quite understand. But what intrigued her the most was the human living there. His name was Alex, a young man who had no idea he was being watched by an alien warrior from another world. Every night, Kiri watched Alex as he went about his routine. She had access to his apartment through advanced technology that allowed her to view everything without him ever knowing. She didn't need to invade his space. All the data she needed was right in front of her. But even though she could see everything, Kiri couldn't help but feel drawn to this human. There was something about him that felt real. Tonight, as she monitored him from her hidden position, Kiri noticed something strange. Alex was asleep. But it wasn't just that he was asleep. It was the way he slept. Unlike the beings Kiri was used to, who slept in controlled environments, Alex slept uncovered, his body exposed to the air. To Kiri, it seemed almost reckless. Why would a creature so fragile leave itself vulnerable like that? But as she observed, Kiri began to understand. Humans, it seemed, were not as concerned about their vulnerability as other species. Alex didn't seem afraid. He slept peacefully, his face calm and relaxed as if nothing could harm him in his sleep. Kiri had seen many warriors, alien and human alike, but none had the courage to sleep so freely. His vulnerability, rather than being a weakness, seemed like a quiet strength. Kiri's curiosity grew. She had been watching him for several days now, but tonight felt different. There was something about the way Alex slept that made her wonder. What was it that allowed him to rest so easily, to sleep uncovered and without fear? Kiri couldn't help but feel a strange longing. It wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about understanding this human. She was torn. Her orders were clear: observe, gather information, and report back. She was not to interfere with the humans in any way, but Kiri found herself struggling to follow those orders. She had never experienced this kind of feeling before. She had always been a soldier, trained to stay detached, to remain focused on the mission. But Alex, he made her question everything. Why was he so different from the others she had observed? In the silence of the night, Kiri's thoughts were interrupted by a soft sound. It was Alex, stirring in his sleep. He shifted in the bed, his body moving slightly, but his eyes remained closed. Kiri froze. Her heart raced, and for a moment she wondered if he could somehow sense her presence. She had never been detected before, but this was different. Alex's vulnerability made her feel exposed as well. But after a few moments, Alex returned to his deep slumber, unaware of Kiri's watchful gaze. She exhaled in relief, though a part of her felt disappointed. She wanted him to notice her, to see her as she saw him, but that was not her mission. She was here to observe, not to interact. Yet in this quiet moment, Kiri could not shake the feeling that there was something she needed to understand about this human. She had no explanation for it. She only knew that he had stirred something within her, something she had never felt before. Kiri's heart pounded in her chest. She stood there, motionless, as she watched Alex sleep. His room was small, but in that moment, it felt like the whole universe had shrunk. It was just the two of them alone in this quiet space, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, Kiri felt a strange sense of connection. It wasn't logical, it wasn't part of her mission, but it was real. As Kiri continued to watch Alex sleep, her thoughts raced. What was it about him that made her feel this way? Was it his vulnerability? His innocence? Or was it simply the mystery of the human race itself? Kiri didn't know the answer. All she knew was that for the first time, she was more than just an observer. She was beginning to understand what it meant to be human. And in that understanding, she realized that her mission had changed. It wasn't just about observing anymore. She had become invested. And that, Kiri realized, was the most dangerous thing of all. Part 2. 800 words ka lekho, or interesting hona chahiye or third-person style ma lekhniha, or simple basic English ka, or violated free hona chahiye, without short. Heading. Kiri couldn't stop thinking about Alex. Each night as she watched him, her curiosity grew. There was something about him that pulled her in, something beyond the surface. Humans were supposed to be weak, vulnerable, and easily crushed by the weight of the universe. Yet Alex was different. He had an energy that made Kiri wonder if there was more to his species than what the council had led her to believe. She had never experienced this feeling before. Being a soldier, she had trained herself to stay detached. It was always about the mission. Emotions had no place in her world. But Alex had changed that. His vulnerability, the way he slept uncovered, the way he lived so openly, had begun to blur the lines between duty and personal curiosity. Kiri knew she had to remain focused, but the pull was undeniable. Over the following days, she continued to monitor Alex from her hidden position. Every night she watched him sleep. Every morning she saw him go about his daily routine. She learned about the small things that made him who he was. He enjoyed reading strange human stories, often smiling at the pages. He had a passion for music, humming softly while he worked. And despite his seemingly quiet demeanor, there was an underlying strength in the way he carried himself. Kiri was fascinated. There was something so natural about him, a peacefulness that made her feel as if Earth was the most tranquil place in the galaxy. She couldn't understand why her mission required her to only observe and not interact. She wanted to talk to him, to ask questions, to understand what made him tick. But she couldn't. Her orders were clear: gather information, do not interfere. One evening, as Kiri watched from her concealed vantage point, she noticed something new. Alex seemed troubled. He sat at his desk, his hand on his forehead, rubbing his temples as if something was weighing on him. For the first time, Kiri saw him not as the peaceful, carefree human she had grown accustomed to, but as someone struggling with an inner turmoil. Her eyes narrowed, and her thoughts raced. She knew she couldn't intervene, but she felt an undeniable urge to help him. Kiri had seen many beings in her time, from warriors to diplomats, but none of them had ever made her feel this way. Humans were meant to be weak and powerless. Yet Alex was proving her wrong every single day. There was a depth to him, an emotional strength that seemed far beyond his physical fragility. Kiri felt an urge to step out of the shadows, to reveal herself to him. She had always been careful, never allowing anyone to see her, never letting her presence be known. But for a brief moment, she wondered what it would be like to speak to him, to have a conversation, to understand why he was troubled. She knew it was a dangerous thought, one that could cost her everything. The mission was too important. The peace between their worlds could depend on her actions. But still, there was something about Alex that made it hard to ignore the growing pull inside her. She wanted to learn about him, to know what had caused his distress. Was it something that could be fixed? Was it something only he could understand? Kiri felt helpless in her silence, unable to offer any comfort to the human she had grown to care about. The days continued, and Kiri observed Alex more closely. She noted the small signs of his internal struggle, the way he would sometimes fidget or become lost in thought. There were moments when he seemed to retreat into himself, as if trying to shut out the world around him. Kiri wondered what was causing this. Was it something personal? A loss? Or perhaps something larger? Something about the world he lived in? Her thoughts were interrupted one night when Alex suddenly stood up from his desk, his face tight with frustration. He walked across the room, pacing back and forth. Kiri watched, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she should remain hidden, but she couldn't help but feel a connection to him, a bond that was growing stronger with each passing day. Alex's steps grew more agitated as he muttered to himself. Kiri could see the tension in his body, the way his hands clenched into fists. It was as if he was fighting an invisible battle, one that no one else could see. She couldn't stand watching him suffer in silence. For the first time, Kiri found herself wishing she could step into his world, to offer him the support she had always been trained to give others. But she was an outsider, a silent observer from another world. She couldn't interfere with his life. She had her mission to complete. She had to stay hidden. As Alex calmed down and returned to his desk, Kiri felt a deep sadness inside her. She had grown attached to him, even though she knew it was wrong. The mission wasn't about making connections, it was about gathering information and returning home. Yet as she watched him that night, alone in his room, Kiri realized something profound. Humans weren't as weak as the Council had made them out to be. They were resilient, capable of enduring great hardships, even when they didn't have the physical strength to fight back. For the first time, Kiri saw the strength in vulnerability, in the way Alex carried his struggles silently. She couldn't explain it, but she knew that her mission had already changed. She was no longer just an observer. She had become part of his world, whether she wanted to be or not. Kiri stared at the screen in front of her, knowing that her next steps would be the hardest of all. She had crossed a line and there was no turning back. What would happen next? She didn't know, but for the first time, she wanted to find out. Kiri sat in the darkness of the observation room, watching Alex as he sat by his desk, his eyes fixed on the small screen in front of him. The dim light from the computer illuminated his face, casting shadows across his features. There was a weariness in his expression that Kiri hadn't seen before. She had been watching him for days now, learning his routines, his habits, and the small details that made him who he was. But tonight, something felt different. She could tell that something was troubling him more than usual. His usual calm demeanor had been replaced with a sense of frustration, almost as if he was fighting with something inside him. Kiri wondered what it was. Was it something from his past? Something in his mind that weighed him down? She had seen many beings in her travels, but none had ever displayed the same mix of strength and vulnerability as Alex. As Kiri watched him, her mind raced. She had always been taught to stay detached, to remain objective and focused on the mission. But with Alex it was different. She couldn't seem to shake the feeling that he needed someone to talk to, someone to share his burden with. But she wasn't allowed to do that. She wasn't allowed to interfere. For a long time she simply watched him, unable to turn away. There was a quiet sadness in his eyes, and it tugged at her heart in a way she couldn't explain. She didn't even know why she cared so much. It wasn't part of her mission to get involved in his life, yet the pull to understand him, to help him, became stronger with each passing day. The silence in the room was broken when Alex suddenly stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. As he pushed it back, he paced across the room, his movements sharp and quick, like he was trying to outrun whatever was troubling him. Kiri's heart raced as she watched him. She knew she should stay hidden, remain a mere observer, but she couldn't help but feel drawn to him. She wanted to help, wanted to reach out and offer some kind of comfort, but she knew that would put everything at risk. Alex stopped by the window, staring out into the night. His shoulders were hunched, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his hoodie. He looked small, almost lost in the vastness of the room. For a moment, Kiri felt a pang of sympathy for him. Humans were so fragile, yet they carried so much weight on their shoulders. They didn't have the strength of other species, yet they fought to survive every day. Kiri's thoughts were interrupted as Alex turned away from the window and sat back down at his desk. He ran a hand through his hair and let out a frustrated sigh. Kiri could sense his frustration even from the safety of her hidden position. She couldn't understand it fully, but she could feel the weight of his emotions in the air. She wondered if this was something all humans experienced, this internal struggle that seemed to take so much from them. Was it the way they were built, or was it something more, something deeper? She had to admit she was growing more and more curious about him, about how he handled his struggles, about how he coped with the things that weighed him down. She had seen countless warriors, diplomats, and explorers in her time, but none of them had shown the same kind of quiet determination that Alex possessed. Despite his struggles, despite the vulnerability that came with being human, he kept going. He kept fighting even when it seemed like the world was against him. But Kiri knew she couldn't stay here forever. She was here on a mission, one that was meant to be completed with no interference. Her superiors had given her clear instructions: observe, gather data, and report. That was all. But now, as she watched Alex again, she felt like there was something more at stake. It wasn't just about gathering information anymore. It was about understanding what made humans so resilient, so strong despite their weaknesses. Kiri knew she had to focus on the mission, but the truth was, she didn't want to. She didn't want to stay hidden in the shadows anymore. She wanted to step into the light, to speak to Alex and understand him better. But she knew that was impossible. Her mission was clear, and interfering with a human was not part of the plan. She was not allowed to make any contact with him. As she sat there, lost in her thoughts, Kiri found herself torn between her duty and the growing connection she felt to Alex. She had never been in a situation like this before. She had always been able to detach herself, to remain distant from the beings she observed. But Alex was different. His vulnerability, his quiet strength had broken through the walls she had built around herself. Kiri stood up and paced the small room, her mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. She couldn't stay here forever. She couldn't keep watching him from the shadows, but what if stepping out of the darkness would only cause more harm? What if revealing herself would change everything, not just for Alex, but for the fragile peace between their worlds? She didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't continue being a passive observer. The more she watched Alex, the more she realized that she had a choice to make. And that choice would change everything. As she took one last look at Alex, still lost in thought at his desk, Kiri made a decision. She would find a way to help him, even if it meant breaking the rules. She couldn't just watch anymore. She needed to understand him. And in doing so, perhaps she would finally understand herself. Kiri sat in the darkness of the observation room, her mind still racing from the decisions she had made in the past few days. The quiet hum of the equipment around her was the only sound, but inside her thoughts were louder than ever. She had crossed a line. She had stayed too long. She had become too attached to the human she was supposed to be studying. She had never expected to feel anything for Alex. When she first arrived on Earth, she had been focused only on the mission. Observe, gather information, report back. That was it. It had always been that way. Emotions were something for other beings, not for someone like Kiri, trained from birth to remain distant, focused only on her tasks. But Alex was different. He had shaken something in her, something she didn't even know was there. Every night she watched him, and every night she found herself more and more invested in his life. She saw the small things, how he smiled when he read a book, how he hummed along to the music, how he struggled with his own thoughts, trying to make sense of the weight on his shoulders. She saw the way he fought to keep going, even when the world seemed to be against him. Kiri had spent a lifetime observing the strength of warriors, of diplomats, of powerful beings who could bend the galaxy to their will. But none of them had the quiet strength that Alex had. He wasn't a fighter. He wasn't an expert in combat or strategy. He was simply human, with all the flaws and vulnerabilities that came with it. And yet there was something in him that made Kiri believe humans weren't as weak as everyone had told her. The truth was, she didn't know why she cared so much. It made no sense. She had been trained to stay detached, to complete her mission without letting anything else get in the way. But every time she looked at Alex, every time she saw the way he struggled with his own fears, Kiri couldn't help but feel a deep sympathy for him. Tonight, once again, she watched him. Alex sat on his couch, staring blankly at the wall in front of him. He looked tired, drained, as though whatever battle he was facing had worn him down. He had been like this for days now, and Kiri couldn't stop wondering what was causing it. She knew it wasn't just the normal stress of life, it was something deeper, something that seemed to be eating away at him from the inside. Kiri felt a sharp pang in her chest. It wasn't just pity. It was a strange mix of longing and helplessness. She wanted to help him, but she couldn't. She wasn't supposed to. She wasn't allowed to interfere. That was the rule. But as she watched him, her heart ached for him. He was alone, struggling in ways that she couldn't understand. And all she could do was watch. Her eyes followed his every movement. Alex stood up and walked to the window, his hands shoved into his pockets. He looked out into the night, his face shadowed by the soft light coming through the window. Kiri could see the way his shoulders slumped, the way he seemed to carry the weight of the world on his back. She wondered what was going through his mind. What was he thinking? Was it the same thing every day? The same worries, the same doubts, the same fear that kept him awake at night? Kiri's fingers itched. She wanted to speak to him, to ask him what was wrong, to offer him comfort, but that was impossible. She knew it. She had to remain hidden, remain silent. Her mission was still her priority, even if every part of her screamed to do something else. For a moment, she considered leaving. She could just slip away, return to the stars, and forget about this human who had begun to occupy so much of her thoughts. But something held her back. She couldn't leave him like this. She had already become too involved, too invested in his struggle. She couldn't just walk away, not when she had seen his pain. Kiri took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. She couldn't afford to let her emotions cloud her judgment. Her job was to observe, not to interact. That was what she was trained for. But it was becoming harder and harder to stick to that. Alex turned away from the window and sat back down on the couch, his head in his hands. Kiri watched him carefully, her heart heavy with a mixture of frustration and empathy. She knew what it felt like to carry the weight of something you couldn't escape from. She had felt it many times in her life, but she had never felt it quite like this. She had never felt it for another being, let alone a human. For a moment, Kiri wondered if Alex knew how much he mattered. Did he understand the strength he had inside him? Did he know that despite everything, he was still fighting? Even when it seemed like the world was closing in on him, he kept going. That was something Kiri had never seen before in any being, let alone a human. His resilience was something that should be admired. Kiri's thoughts were interrupted by the soft beep of her communication device. She quickly glanced at the screen, and her stomach sank. It was a message from her superiors. They had noticed her extended stay. They had noticed her increased interest in Alex. And they were not pleased. She felt a cold wave of fear wash over her. Her mission was at risk. If she didn't report back, soon if she didn't follow her orders, there could be consequences. She knew what those consequences could be. She had seen it happen to others who had broken the rules. Kiri stood up, her hand hovering over the device. She knew she had to make a choice. She had to decide whether to follow her mission and leave Alex behind or to risk everything for the chance to understand him. The decision weighed heavily on her, and for the first time, Kiri wasn't sure what the right choice was. Kiri stood in the quiet of her observation room, staring at the blinking light on her communication device. The message from her superiors was clear. Report immediately, complete your mission, and return. But even as the words flashed on the all screen, Kiri couldn't bring herself to respond. She was frozen, torn between duty and something she had never felt before. Her mission had always been straightforward. Observe, collect data, and report. But everything had changed once she started watching Alex. He wasn't like the others she had studied. He was human, fragile in some ways but strong in others. He carried the weight of something unseen, something deep inside him, and it called to Kiri in a way she couldn't explain. She had spent weeks now learning about him. She had watched his daily routine, The way he struggled, the way he tried to keep going despite everything. But even with all the information she had gathered, there was so much more she didn't understand. She couldn't stop thinking about him. It wasn't just about her mission anymore, it was about Alex. Kiri paced back and forth, the silence of the room pressing in on her. She knew she was taking a risk by staying longer than she should have. Her superiors wouldn't understand. They had given her clear instructions and she had broken every one of them. But the more she watched him, the more she realized that she couldn't just walk away. Not now. Alex had become more than just an observation. He had become a puzzle she couldn't stop trying to solve. There was something in him, a quiet strength that had captivated her from the start. He wasn't a warrior, like the beings Kiri had known. He wasn't a diplomat, skilled in negotiation and strategy. He was just human, with all the flaws and vulnerabilities that came with it. And yet, despite everything, he kept fighting. Every day he kept going, no matter how much it hurt. The more she watched him, the more she realized how much she wanted to understand him, how much she wanted to be part of his world, to help him carry the weight he seemed to bear alone. But Kiri knew she couldn't. It wasn't her place. She had been trained to stay distant, to be an observer, not a participant. Yet with every passing day, that distance became harder and harder to maintain. Kiri's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Alex's voice. She had been watching him for so long that she had grown familiar with his habits, his routines. She knew when he would speak, when he would move, and when he would remain still. But tonight was different. There was something in his voice, a tone of frustration, that caught Kiri's attention. She turned her gaze to the screen, watching as Alex stood in front of his window once again, his hands gripping the frame. His face was tight with frustration, his expression a mix of anger and helplessness. Kiri could feel the weight of his emotions from across the room. He was struggling again. It was clear now that whatever it was that bothered him wasn't something he could easily shake off. Kiri's heart tightened in her chest. She had seen him like this before, but this time, there was something different in the air. She could sense the deeper conflict inside him, the one that had been simmering just beneath the surface. It was as if he was about to break, but he kept pushing forward, refusing to let the weight of his emotions control him. She knew she should stay away. She should remain hidden, just like she had been instructed. But Kiri couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward him. She couldn't just sit back and watch him suffer in silence. It wasn't fair. She had seen so much pain in the universe, but none of it had ever affected her like this. Without thinking, Kiri stood up from her seat. She moved toward the control panel, her fingers hovering over the keys. She had to make a choice. She could report back, end her mission, and leave Earth behind. Or she could stay. She could reach out to Alex in some way, try to offer him the comfort he so desperately needed. But doing that would break every rule she had ever known. It would put her mission in jeopardy. It could even endanger her career. But as she watched Alex again, her heart felt heavy. She had already crossed so many lines. She had watched him when she shouldn't have. She had become emotionally involved when she wasn't supposed to. And now, she had to decide whether to walk away or take the final step. Alex turned away from the window and sat down on the couch again, his face buried in his hands. Kiri could feel the weight of his sadness, the deep well of frustration and loneliness that seemed to surround him. For the first time, Kiri felt a true sense of helplessness. She couldn't just watch him like this. She couldn't just turn her back and walk away. She had to do something. Kiri took a deep breath. She had already stayed longer than she was supposed to, and now there was no turning back. She had to choose. There was no more time for hesitation. She had to make a decision about what she was willing to risk. In that moment, Kiri made her choice. She would reach out. She would not let Alex face this alone. She didn't know how, and she didn't know what would happen next. But she knew, one thing for certain, she couldn't continue to hide in the shadows. With newfound resolve, Kiri turned to the control panel and began to make her decision. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew it was time to step out of the darkness. It was time to be more than just an observer. Kiri's heart was pounding as she stared at the control panel in front of her. The decision she had just made felt surreal. She had spent so many days watching from the shadows, keeping herself hidden, observing Alex without him knowing. But now, that distance no longer felt right. She couldn't keep pretending that she was only an observer. She had already crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. Alex was still sitting on the couch, his face buried in his hands, clearly struggling with something deep inside him. Kiri's thoughts were a whirlwind. She couldn't shake the feeling that if she didn't act now, if she didn't somehow find a way to connect with him, he might break. She had seen enough of the human condition to know that sometimes even the smallest gesture could make a difference. But Kiri wasn't sure how to make that gesture. She had no experience with humans on this level. Her life had always been about duty, about following orders. But now her heart was urging her to do something different. The rules, the training, everything she had known seemed to fall away in the face of what she was feeling. Her mission had turned into something more personal, something that scared her more than anything she had ever encountered. Kiri took a deep breath, steadying herself. There was a way to reach out to him, to make her presence known, without revealing too much. She could use the technology at her disposal to communicate with him. It wasn't direct contact, but it was something. It was better than nothing. She tapped a few keys on the console, and a soft, melodic sound echoed through the room. The voice she had created, a calm, neutral voice that would not reveal her identity, spoke from the speaker system. It was a simple message, but the words felt heavier than they ever had before. "Alex," the voice said, soft and soothing. "You are not alone." The words echoed in the quiet apartment. Kiri's heart skipped a beat as she watched Alex freeze. He looked up, his eyes wide with confusion. His gaze shifted around the room, trying to locate the source of the voice. Kiri held her breath, hoping he wouldn't suspect anything strange. She had to stay hidden. She couldn't reveal herself just yet. Alex looked toward the window, the door, the walls, his confusion growing. "Who's there?" he muttered, his voice thick with uncertainty. "What is this? Is someone messing with me?" Kiri felt a pang of regret. She had hoped that her words would bring comfort, not confusion. But she couldn't take it back now. She had started something and she had to see it through. "Alex," the voice continued, steady and calm. "You have been carrying a heavy burden for far too long. You don't have to do it alone." Alex stood up suddenly, looking around the room in disbelief. His face was pale, and his eyes darted to every corner of the room. Kiri could feel his confusion, his fear. She wished she could reach out to him in person, to explain everything, to show him that he wasn't alone in his struggles. But that wasn't possible. Not yet. "Who's there?" Alex shouted, his voice louder now, desperate. "Show yourself." Kiri's heart sank. She had never intended to scare him. This was supposed to be a moment of comfort, not fear. But she couldn't stop now. She couldn't undo what she had started. The voice spoke again, softer this time, trying to calm him. "It is okay. I am not here to harm you. I only wish to help you carry what you are holding inside." Alex stood still, his body tense. He seemed to be weighing the words in his mind, trying to decide whether to believe them. His breath came in quick, shallow gasps as he tried to make sense of the situation. Kiri watched him closely, her chest tight with worry. She had no idea what would happen next, but she couldn't let him stay in this state of fear. After what felt like an eternity, Alex slowly lowered his hands, his fingers trembling. He stared at the walls, the silence settling around him. Kiri could see the doubt in his eyes, but there was something else there too, something vulnerable. He was listening. "I don't know who or what you are," Alex said, his voice hoarse. "But I can't keep pretending that everything is fine. It's not. I feel like I'm losing control of everything. I don't know what to do." Kiri felt the weight of his words. He wasn't just talking to her. He was talking to himself. She knew that feeling well, carrying something inside, too heavy to hold on to, yet too afraid to let go. It was a feeling she had experienced more times than she cared to count. She wanted to reach out to him, to tell him that it was okay, that he wasn't alone in this. "You don't have to carry it by yourself," the voice said again. Let it out. You don't have to keep it inside anymore. Alex stood silently for a moment, his gaze fixed on the floor. Kiri could feel the shift. In him, the way his shoulders seemed to relax. His face softened as if the weight had been lifted, even if just a little. He looked up, his eyes scanning the room as though searching for the source of the voice. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice quieter now, almost afraid to hope. "I am someone who understands," the voice replied. "I understand more than you think, and you don't have to go through this alone." Alex stood still for a moment longer, the silence stretching between them. Kiri watched him, waiting for his next move, hoping that her words had made a difference, that she had done something to ease his burden. Finally, Alex sat back down, his body slumping into the couch as if the conversation had drained the last bit of strength from him. He closed his eyes, his breath slowing as he finally allowed himself to relax, even if just a little. Kiri watched him, her heart heavy with emotion. She had made a connection, however small, but it was a step forward. She had helped him in some small way, and for the first time in weeks she felt at peace. She had done something right. For now, that was enough. Kiri's heart was still racing, the emotions she felt after speaking to Alex echoing in her mind. She had crossed the line, and now she was uncertain of what to do next. Her mission had changed, shifted in a way she hadn't expected. She wasn't sure how much time had passed, but when she looked at the screen again, Alex had not moved. He was still sitting on the couch, staring off into space. There was something about him, something in his expression that made Kiri feel like she had made a difference. Even if it was just a small one, she had reached him. She had shown him that he didn't have to carry everything by himself. For the first time, Kiri allowed herself to feel the weight of her decision. She had done the unthinkable. She had connected. She knew that what she had done was dangerous. She had broken the rules. Her superiors would never approve of her actions, and there would be consequences if they found out. But she also knew that the rules didn't matter anymore, not in this moment. Alex mattered more than anything else. He had become more than just a subject of her mission. He had become someone she cared about. Kiri sat down, her fingers resting lightly on the controls in front of her. She wasn't sure if she should leave him alone now or stay, watching from a distance, waiting for the right moment. She couldn't do this forever, though. She couldn't stay hidden. The choice she had made had already set something into motion. It had changed everything. She looked back at the screen. Alex was still sitting in the same spot, his eyes closed, as if he had finally allowed himself to breathe. His shoulders were no longer hunched, the tension that had been there for days starting to fade. Kiri wondered what had happened inside him. Was it her words that had made the difference? Or had it been something else, something he had been holding on to for too long? She didn't know the answer, but she hoped that, for once, he had found some peace. It was clear to her now that the universe wasn't just about wars or missions, or the rules that governed them. There was something more, something softer and more fragile, and it was that something that made people like Alex so different. Kiri stood up and moved to the window. The stars outside seemed distant, almost cold. Her heart felt heavy, but there was a small sense of warmth growing within her. She had reached out to him, and in doing so, she had given him a piece of herself. She had crossed the divide between observer and participant, and it had changed her too. The human experience, with all its flaws, its struggles, and its quiet victories, was something she hadn't understood until now. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know how Alex would respond to her, or if he would even remember the voice that had spoken to him. But she did know one thing. The next time she watched him, it would be different. She wouldn't just be watching anymore. She would be there, a part of his world, even if only in the smallest way. A sudden beeping sound from the control panel interrupted her thoughts. Kiri froze. She looked over at the screen, her stomach tightening. The message was from her superiors. It was time to report. She had already stayed too long, and the council was waiting for her to send the final data. She had been told that this mission was of the utmost importance, and now she was faced with the reality of what her actions had meant. For a long moment, Kiri hesitated. She knew what she had to do. She had to comply. Her duty had to come first. But as she moved toward the panel, she found herself frozen in place again. She couldn't do it. She couldn't send the data back, not yet. Not when Alex was still out there, struggling with things she couldn't even begin to understand. She couldn't just disappear. Kiri took a deep breath. This was the moment when everything would change. She knew she had to make a decision. She could follow the rules and report back to the council, ending her connection with Alex and returning to her life of detached observation. Or she could stay. She could risk everything, defy the council, and continue to be a part of Alex's world, even if it meant losing everything she had worked for. The message continued to blink on the screen, but Kiri ignored it. She knew what she had to do. She would stay. She would not leave him now, not after everything that had happened. She had to see this through, no matter the consequences. Kiri turned away from the control panel, her eyes focused on the figure of Alex on the screen. He had his head tilted back now, his eyes closed, resting for the first time in what seemed like forever. The tension was gone from his body, replaced by something softer, something that made Kiri believe that perhaps, just perhaps, he had found a little bit of peace. She didn't know how long she would stay or what would come next, but she knew that in that moment, she had made the right choice. For the first time since arriving on Earth, she felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with her mission or the council. She had connected with another being, and that connection had changed both of them. As the stars outside the window twinkled quietly, Kiri made her way to the door, ready to step out into the unknown. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that whatever happened, she wouldn't be facing it alone.